Welcome to the Deep Chat.
All right, Brad, so here's the question this week. In light of so many changes in technology going on in recent times, is data still the new oil?
Yes. Didn't need to think about that one much. What do you think? And then we'll unpack it.
Now more than ever.
Agreed. That was easy. We agree. Let's unpack it.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is the value to use the data. For example, Reddit just announced that they're going to start forcing people to pay for access to their API. I can only guess that that is in direct response to the volumes of data that have been transferred to train AI data sets or machine learning algorithms.
Yep.
I'm sure ChatGPT was trained on it. I think you talked to me about it, was Hugging Face. All of these are probably using Reddit in some fashion because the corpus of data there is really, it's valuable. It's big.
Yeah, so from Reddit's perspective, they weren't involved in the training of this model, yet some software crawled their web server. So they're paying the electricity on that server, and this thing downloaded a bunch of information off of it and then made a thing. And Reddit's not getting credit for it.
Well, and there's similarly imagery, art, pictures, and things like that. There are artists and people saying they didn't get paid for the fact that their data was used to help with OpenAI and ChatGPT, or not DALL-E 2, becoming what it is today.
Yep.
So, there's a lawsuit going on there. That's a separate but related issue. We're seeing a pullback in general of companies saying, hey, whoa, wait a minute. AI is doing some really great things, but it arrived there with data that I created or another million people created. So Reddit owns that data. And up until this point, correct me if I'm wrong, I've never scraped it, but Reddit had an API that you could access pretty much anything for free.
I messed around with it a little bit. I didn't really get that project off the ground, but I know I can control the ads, and we downloaded data from our ad spend. I believe you can automate posting and commenting and stuff as well. So one of the main use cases would be if I wanted to build my own front end for Reddit, my own mobile app, I think I could have done that and probably still could do it with their API.
Even if there's no API, though, doesn't it mean that you could just scrape the pages as well? Like Google does that all the time for indexing purposes. If they're only charging for API access, doesn't that imply that they should start charging for, web page access too? What's the difference there?
Well, that's a little different because the average web user doesn't make that many requests. I mean, you go on, between 1 and maybe 20 pages as most people, and the cost to Reddit's very low. It's a very low load on their server versus a software application, a crawler, going out and spidering their whole website and downloading everything. That is a lot of demand on their server. So they have to stand up the technology for that. And kind of why should they? That person's getting a commercial benefit. So many sites, I don't believe Reddit is one of them, but many sites are aggressively anti-crawl. LinkedIn is one of the most famous ones, where if you try and get the data, the system's going to recognize frequent requests from the same IP address or patterns in the requests and start denying you.
And volume of request, etc.
Yeah, or send you a CAPTCHA, stuff like that.
Right. Okay, so that makes sense. So it makes crawling it very hard. APIs could throttle as well, though, right? We could throttle API to say, hey, you only get X number of requests per hour, 2, 3.
I would frame it the other way and say that the API charges per use, so please go ahead and use as much as you want, and I'll charge you for it.
So in that way, the data set that someone might want access to might end up costing them $3 million, who knows, if they're trying to scrape all of the history of Reddit.
Probably much, much less than that, but that's the idea.
Interesting. Not only does this imply that there will be or is a future where the data for not just Reddit, but for other companies, like you said, LinkedIn, I can't think of what other companies are used for training data sets, is going to be yet more valuable. And then that's going to increase the cost of training, or the ChatGPTs of the world and the AI ML models that are the result of it, right? So we'll see this bubbling up to the top, I would imagine.
Well, what I would like to see happen, and, the world doesn't have to do what I say, but what makes sense to me at this point is if the models like ChatGPT are base models, and people can license those or buy those or use them in generic ways. And then these holders of particular data sets, Reddit's a good example, but a hospital is an interesting use case as well. They should be able to start from the ChatGPT base model with its parameters and do something called transfer learning, where you then extend the base model, but train it now on your custom data set. So it's like ChatGPT plus the humor of Reddit or plus the knowledge of a hospital. And then the output, the agent that comes out of that, should be much more informed about the particular topics at hand. And access to conversation with that agent could become a commercial product, or it could be given away, or, a lot of different scenarios could come out of that.
Let's say you had a group of therapists or whatnot that recorded every session they've ever created, and you could turn that into text. You could take the base model and train it based upon years worth of therapy data.
Yep.
And perhaps transfer learn how to be a therapist. So that very specific data set would then become valuable for a specific use case.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Now, what if the opposite end of that would be you could very easily train something to make jokes by, scraping all of the humorous content or the actual stand-up comedy, the best ones on YouTube, because there's quite a lot of YouTube stand-up comedy, and you could create a humorous chatbot.
Very true.
So that's the type of thing that you think is going to happen. I believe we talked about this before, that we thought that was going to emerge, that there would be many, many different models, but it seems to me that that's going to emerge via this process of people or companies pulling back their data sets and saying, we want to monetize that data set.
That's what's happening in the knee-jerk present. You're right.
Well, I could see where Getty Images could have their own, trained model of DALL-E 2. Or I could see some video game company, let's say Riot Games, could train it on all the chatter that comes out of their video games, when people are going back and forth, and have one specific to them, and they'll keep that data set proprietary. And if you want access, you just access the model, not the data set.
I think that's the way to go.
And so my point is, there's a pullback of data sets and then a custom model that's monetized per company. Some of them may make sense, some of them may not.
And on top of that, I think an economy or some sort of protocol layer where they talk to each other. So I ought to have some sort of virtual assistant that if I ask it a health question, it knows to defer to the bot that's authorized by my insurance provider.
I see. And they would talk not through an API language, but through conversational language?
I mean, that's ultimately how we would communicate with medical personnel today. This is just the opportunity to put a first round of defense in front of it.
Right. So give me an example of what that might look like. I'm a person who has a health problem. I type into my particular AI assistant and it says, oh, you're interested in health. I have to go to the AI bot that deals with Blue Cross Blue Shield because you're that member, right?
Right.
And then that has a conversation, not through API, but through interaction that you can monitor and if you want to, an audit.
Yep.
And arrives at a conclusion and you say, okay, yes, this is what I need to do. Please schedule an appointment for me.
Or maybe, go get ibuprofen and let's check on it tomorrow.
Right, exactly. Okay. So it's first order triage in that case, really.
Yeah. And then a transcript goes to your doctor in case he or she wants to double check.
Okay, I'll buy that. So in terms of, is this going to be a trend in customers, not customers, companies restricting third-party access to the data? We both said yes. Can you think of other examples of companies that may end up sort of falling to this as well? Reddit is obviously a big one because I know that there's a huge amount of information on there.
The other prominent area is Q&A sites like Stack Overflow and Quora.
Well, that was what I was going to ask next. Is Stack Overflow, what are they currently doing, or Quora?
I have to believe that both have jumped on this bandwagon. I just pulled out the press release that says Reddit is going to charge. Both of those sites are probably anti-crawl a bit already, and I think they're most likely beefing that up and updating their legal policies and whatnot, because it's a major threat to their intellectual property. I mean, they have an asset in that data, But if everyone can have it for free, it's not much of an asset.
But guess what? April 20th. Here's an article. This is April 20th, not long ago. Stack Overflow will charge AI giants for training data. The programmer Q&A site joins Reddit in demanding compensation when its data is used to train algorithms and ChatGPT style bots.
They're in a tough spot. If I were them, I would like to take it off the table and say no one can train on it. I'm going to train on it.
Well, exactly.
But people will just do it anyways.
And this is my point. It seems to me that by pulling back these data sets, some of which are already in the wild, it's really hard to pull it back.
Yeah.
That you will, the conclusion I would make as a business person is that I'm never going to be able to fully protect my data set, and I'm not going to be able to charge enough for access to it to make it necessarily worthwhile. But what I can do if my data set is powerful enough is to create my own, Stack Overflow chatbot or ChatGPT, my transformer learning, new version, and then sell access to that. Because you as a developer and I know as a developer, to me, that's enticing, right? If it's trained well, and if they could combine that with GitHub, it would be a pretty powerful tool, like if you could scan all of GitHub.
Which Microsoft has obviously done.
It might be too late for Stack Overflow. I think the cat is out of the bag, so to speak, and Stack Overflow has probably already seen a large decrease. I don't think they're going to talk about it, but my guess is they have. And so I think other companies are going to reach that conclusion. How can we monetize this data set that we have? Facebook might be a more...
that's the dark web, though.
Well, exactly. That was what Facebook's data set is interesting and weird at the same time. It's more of a representation of human online behavior, which can often be dark and gross. What does that data set look like? And can they call it for just to represent having like a friend to talk to? Or do they call it and make it, I want an antagonistic friend, or I want a...
Those are viable things that could do that today.
I want someone who makes fun of me. I want have someone who always says positive things to me. And more than likely, you can do that today without having to train it differently, right? You could just train the whole thing on the trove of data that Facebook has. And if you prompted it properly, it would speak in a certain way. Is that?
I think the opportunity at Facebook is really more for improvements in their recommender system and in advertising than directly the language generation. But, they do have a massive data set that could do some of those, virtual friend stuff if they wanted to explore it.
Okay, so explain what you think Facebook, how I just unpack that a little bit. Give me an example.
So at its core, what is Facebook? It's a feed of posts. What goes into your feed, in what order, and how they put the ads in there are really the key problems that Facebook needs to figure out, or at least is probably going to use AI and machine learning to do. They have methods of doing that today, obviously, that they're tinkering with. The question is, can they now supercharge those functionalities? That, in the past, maybe 10 years ago, to decide if you would like a particular post, they tried to correlate single words with what you actually liked. So, okay, every time something says Dungeons and Dragons, this guy likes it. Let's show him more Dungeons and Dragons stuff. But it doesn't know that Dungeons and Dragons is a role-playing game. It doesn't know that that's adjacent to video games. It doesn't know any of these things. The language model has some semantic understanding of those relationships. So Facebook might be able to leverage that to make better ways of ranking the posts that they show you.
Right. Okay. So to give what I think is a concrete example, I could say in one paragraph, I could mention Dungeons and Dragons 5 times. But in the paragraph, I actually am talking negatively in a subtle way about Dungeons and Dragons. And historically, they wouldn't pick up on that.
Not 10 years ago, probably not. Maybe they had some sentiment analysis thing going on last couple years, and they could have leveraged that. But, not as profoundly as the recent techniques.
Right. So this might not necessarily be an LLM model that they would use. I don't know.
They would just use the encoder part of it, most likely.
Okay, so a subset in that respect, because they're not interested in having it necessarily spit out text.
Yeah, I mean, I don't work at Facebook. I don't see the use case. Maybe someone very clever there will come up with something, their help system, or I know Facebook pages have chatbots. I don't think it's very popular, but maybe it could now become popular.
Other companies that might have substantial data sets that would be valuable. I could see some company like I said, Psychology Today, maybe all the comments that are pretty interesting as it relates to psychology.
LexisNexis?
Yeah, I don't know a lot about LexisNexis. What's content is that?
It's legal stuff, but that is the extent of my knowledge as well.
Right. Oh, right. But exactly. LegalZoom, another one, right?
I think they're about to go out of business. I'm just going to ask ChatGPT to make the contract.
Right. But to our point is companies are going to be looking for ways to hedge against ChatGPT. And I don't see them having any other option but to pull back their data sets and create their own transfer learned model. And it's a path a lot of companies I think are going to walk down, and a lot of them are going to fail because they're not going to be able to do it well. Their data set won't be as valuable as they think it is. That'll be the death throes for a number of companies like LegalZoom.
Although this is another reason why it's optimistic for Microsoft. This has always been their sort of positioning. They want to partner with companies and be your tech assistant.
Clippy.
Yeah, well, it's not always successful, but...
I mean, this has been a 30-year effort for them, right?
Finally getting to it.
That's the gold standard right there. Clippy.
There's one oversight we should touch on, though, that we haven't gotten to. We're thinking of these data sets, or we've been talking about them in some big static way, like, Reddit, maybe they've already downloaded it. They're so screwed. The data set's already out there. Reddit isn't a static site. Part of what makes it the well-known brand it is that it's constantly being updated. So companies can always cut the spigot off now, and in many industries, recent data is more valuable.
Oh, definitely agree. I think Reddit has a leg up there because there's actually good quality information on there, and having up-to-date information and discussion is important. Companies that have data sets where the problem they're trying to solve doesn't change as frequently, like LegalZoom, might be in a harder position because a contract that works today probably works 2 years from now.
Stands to reason.
Java code that works today probably works 2 years from now. So in that case, Stack Overflow. Are there new developments? Yes. So there might be a new programming language that takes off. Maybe Rust, becomes a much more widely used programming language, and that's not as embedded in the model, and it needs to be retrained. So yeah, to that degree, I think you're right. There is some hope for these companies, but when I say the data is already out there, I don't mean the whole data set. I just mean that the models have already been trained against it. So they have a really good basis to move forward, and all that training data can just be trained on top of. They don't need to re-download the history unless a new algorithm comes out.